Hello, my name is Chris Stefano. I'm an editor at the Mineralogical Record magazine, and again, I am your host for the Mineralogical Record podcast, interviewing authors about important articles in the Mineralogical Record. Today, I'm sitting here with Phil Persson, my co-author on the wonderful Michigan Copper Country issue that was released last year, and we're going to be talking together, a little bit different format than standard, about what it took to make this article.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming up, Phil.
Of course.
So with this project, it was a little bit different. I have been interviewing authors about their work, but in this case, this project was originally my idea, and you came in and provided the extra muscle, as it were, to help me make this happen. And I'm just so happy to have you as a collaborator on this project. Thank you for joining me now to talk about it.
Well, thank you. It was really a privilege to be involved in, and I look forward to doing more. It's been a lot of fun. I've been interested in copper country minerals going pretty far back as a collector, and what got me really interested in Michigan copper country was working for Collector's Edge Minerals, and they kind of set me loose on the Midwest in these road trips. And they would basically put me in a van and load me up with minerals, and I would go around the country and visit collectors and museums and do some selling and stuff of that nature. And you and I were already friends at that point, so I knew that the copper country was probably not going to be a gold mine as far as high-end mineral collectors went, but I knew I was going to the Twin Cities, and I thought, you know what, I want to find a way to get up to the copper country because I'd never been. And at that time, you were the curator at the AEC Museum.
That's true.
And you were a very gracious host on my first visit, stayed at your house, and you showed me the museum, and we visited some of the mines, and I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. For me, that went from kind of having an amateur outsider appreciation, whatever you want to call it, to really realizing this is a place that I want to focus on a bit in my mineral dealing and collecting career. And I also really want to try to be a student of the history. So that was really the kind of the falling in love period for me with copper country.
And that actually ties in very nicely to my experience, because it was somewhere around the time that you visited at that point that I started to realize that there was need for additional coverage of the copper country in the specimen mineralogical literature. So I had been the curator of Michigan Tech's A.E. Seaman Museum for a couple of years at the point that you visited. And as I had been familiarizing myself with the collection, and the literature about Michigan copper country, I began to realize that, okay, so what's out there in the literature? There's Mark Wilson and Stan Dial's excellent Copper Country special issue from 1992 that was published in the Mineralogical Record. That is an excellent overview of the entire district.
Absolutely.
But what I realized that it lacked as I got more and more familiar with that collection at Michigan Tech was it lacked a lot of depth. It was trying to cover the entire district and do so in 100 pages. And the district just has such deep history, has been so prolific for fine mineral specimens that I realized this is only scratching the surface.
100%.
And then, when I looked at what other coverage there was, most of the other coverage are the wonderful articles by Tom Rosemeyer in Rocks and Minerals.
That's what I was about to say.
While these articles are great, what Tom has been doing is very different from a historical dive.
Let's focus on contemporary finds. I had the same sort of discovery process because as I got interested in copper country and trying to learn more, obviously Wilson and Dial 92, that was where I turned first, and that's a great overview. And then that led me to Tom's articles and articles by a few other folks in Rocks and Minerals magazine. But those, like you said, are mostly covering contemporary finds. So I found that if I wanted to really understand the deeper history and also the specimen collecting history, I had to dive into all these other sources, and there was no place where that was compiled in a central way.
Right. And the other thing that I realized working with Michigan Tech's collection is that this collection is extremely well documented. But furthermore, most copper country specimens that are on the market are the exact opposite of that. They're extremely poorly documented. And that leaves a huge void of information. People always hoping that they can attribute a mine name to their locality. there are always people who feel that they're experts on the copper country that felt that they could attribute mine names based on having seen a specimen that looked similar. So there's a lot of misinformation
There
and
is.
stuff that's out there.
And while we're on the book topic, I do have to give a brief plug for one of my favorite short mineral books in the copper country, which is my friend Bob Rand's publication with George Robinson, covering the museum collection. And it's a fairly short book that I found that kind of inspirational as far as what I thought we might do, and I'm sure you did as well, because it has a really nice intro. It has fantastic photos, and all the specimens are well documented in that book.
Right. Again, so looking at what was available in the specimen mineralogical literature, I realized there was sort of this void, both in terms of in-depth coverage of the copper country's history and specimens, and in terms of information about what types of specimens came from where within the district. And that really wasn't compiled anywhere.
Yeah.
And so initially at Michigan Tech, I wasn't thinking so much in terms of magazine articles as much as I was in terms of thinking really somebody should write a book about this.
Yeah.
And I remember going to my boss at the time at Michigan Tech and saying, I think it would be worthwhile to spend some time and compile all of this into a large book on the Michigan copper country that would illustrate specimens mine by mine, load by load, that are well documented in order to give people both a deep sense of the history and a deep sense of, okay, these are the kinds of well-documented specimens we can expect to see from different parts of the district. And so start building up
build an authoritative text, for the collector, the historian, the whoever, because it's never been done before.
Right. So I'm the sort of person, don't tell me something's impossible.
Exactly.
Right?
That's a motivator.
Yes, this makes me want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
The reality is it's not impossible. It's a lot of work.
No. Well, I'm curious now that you say that, when you got to the Record, what was your process like as far as getting buy-in? Because you're obviously part of a collaborative team at the Record. What was it like getting buy-in, particularly from Wendell Wilson, when you proposed this idea?
When I joined the Mineralogical Record, one of the high priorities right away was for me to produce as much new content as quickly as possible as I could, because while I'd had plenty of publications prior to joining the Mineralogical Record, none of them had been in the Mineralogical Record, and so the Mineralogical Record readership wasn't necessarily familiar with me. And so Wendell felt it was important, and I happened to agree that we get as much out as possible, as quickly as possible, so that we could showcase my chops, as it were.
Totally.
And help people understand why, in fact, Wendell thought I was a good person to bring onto the staff. So the obvious place to start then was to start with Midwestern localities for two reasons, really. One, as a Midwestern native and someone who had cut their teeth as a collector in the Midwest, I had some
it's an area of expertise for you,
knowledge or expertise, exactly. And two, the Midwest has generally been underrepresented in the Mineralogical Record historically. So there was lots of low-hanging fruit, important Midwestern localities that hadn't been covered or hadn't been covered adequately.
Absolutely.
That I could work on. So I got a couple of obvious choices out. I did the article on the Montreal mine in Wisconsin, and then Clay Center, Ohio, early on, which were obvious choices. There'd been no coverage of these very important localities.
No major article in any magazine.
Exactly. So those were easy choices. And then at some point in the process of writing those ones, and I can't tell you exactly when that was, I started thinking about this book idea about the copper country that I'd had that had been shot down while I had been at Michigan Tech. And I always had thought that, this was a good idea and something somebody really should put time into. And so I said to Wendell, well, what if I revisit the copper country and expand upon what Wilson and Dial did back in '92? When I initially brought the idea to Wendell, he goes, well,
we did that.
Yeah, we did that. There's the copper country issue, and it's beautiful. Why would you want to revisit that? And I said, well, it is beautiful. You're exactly right. And it's great as far as it goes.
Yeah.
But there is a ton more detail we can hit here.
A lot has changed since 1992, and there was a lot that wasn't covered in that, initial issue.
Yeah, well, there's more information available, but more importantly than that, at the end of the day, Mark and Stan were trying to give an overview of the district, and in doing so, that meant that there was a lot of detail that had to be left out. And in terms of illustrations, there are thousands of amazing specimens, and there's only a few hundred illustrated there. And going back to my initial thoughts about, well, we want to have these curated collections of well-documented photos, there was no place for that in the format that Wilson and Dial used for that article.
They had constraints that now the magazine doesn't have.
Right. So to me now, I said to Wendell, look, there is a real opportunity here to expand on this, from this 100-page article. I said, I think we can do 100+ pages just on Keweenaw County.
Exactly. Break it down into manageable sub-districts, if you will.
Right.
Approach it from that perspective, which had never been done before.
Right, exactly. And so Wendell said, really? You think you could do that? And I said, I'm pretty sure I could do it.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, where would you start? And I said, well, I threw out Keweenaw County. Let's start there. We can go mine by mine through Keweenaw County. There's four major specimen productive mines. There's some other minor ones, but we can talk about them just briefly. And just write single articles about the Cliff Mine, the Central Mine, Copper Falls, Phoenix. And he goes, well, that sounds interesting. Go ahead and try it. If it turns out well, then you can do the other ones that you had in mind.
Right. Yeah.
And so then it became, okay, great. So I've got this project green-lighted. I don't want to do this by myself. I need somebody who A, knows what they're doing, B, I can trust, and C, is willing to do the work. And, and I thought about the people I knew. I knew you were really into it. I knew from your background that you knew how to do research. And I could, and we'd gotten to know each other well enough. I knew you were a person, who would make up for any lack of knowledge they had with enthusiasm and hard work.
Thank you. I have to admit, initially when you approached me, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I still do, because it's you're kind of walking in the shadow of a lot of these folks who have been doing this for decades. Somebody like Tom, who is a native and has spent 80 years basically steeped in the Keweenaw. That's tough to compete with. But on the other hand, it was also exciting for me because I was already delving into the literature myself and reading everything I get my hands on. So I thought, I'm going to learn so much more through doing this. And whether it's the geology, whether it's the history, whether it's the photo gathering, the process is really fun. And getting a look kind of behind the scenes, so to speak, in that process to me was fascinating, because I've been involved in minor articles before, and I've been a co-author on some journal publications in the geoscience world. But the way you guys approach it is unique, and I think it's a really cool way of doing it.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because like I said, so most of the other projects I'd done prior to diving into this, there was no specimen mineralogical literature on the subject to speak of. And so it was obvious that, I had something to contribute, and relatively easy. Whereas here, this is a district that there is a lot of specimen mineralogical literature about already, and by people with far more expertise and knowledge than myself even.
Sure, yeah.
And so I definitely found myself...
the bar is high.
Thinking in the same way, I can't screw this up. This, if this isn't amazing, it's not even worth doing.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
And so, even just screwing myself up to saying to Wendell, yes, I think that I can
pull this off,
make something that's going to build on what's already out there without leaving people going, well, this has all been done. Why did you waste your time?
Sure, yeah.
That took a little bit of, well, can I really expect to be able to do this? And, but, Wendell had faith.
Yep.
And, he let me do this. You jumped on and you were right into it from the start. And without a lot of prompting, you were able to produce a lot of notes. We split up the literature to read. You read some of the publications, I read some of the publications, which saved a ton of time.
Totally.
We
Yeah.
combined our notes and
turned it into a draft. Yeah.
Yeah, and a series of drafts really, because we wrote them as separate articles.
Well, that was fun too. I think having the 4 minds as the focus and then splitting them into 2 and 2 that we're each the lead author on. That was really fun. It made it more kind of manageable and a little less intimidating for me.
Yep.
And it was always good to know that whatever I didn't know about a particular mind or shortcoming of my research, you could back me up on. You have a particular affinity for the newspaper clippings and newspaper quotes from, old archives, which I wasn't really aware of. And, you adding all those things to my drafts, fantastic. It just adds another layer to it that, I wouldn't have had there on my own.
Yeah, it was so fun to dig those up, and I'm addicted to the newspaper archives now. Wendell had, showed me that the Record had a subscription to these, and and Wendell had showed me them before, but this issue was really the first time that I'd really played with those and seen what I might be able to get out of them, and it was pure gold.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
There are firsthand accounts of visits to mines that had not been published since they'd been published in a newspaper 120.
Well, exactly. It's all in this kind of gray literature, and I found that process really fun, mining through this literature that's never been digitized, never been quoted or whatever, and putting it out there. It really gives the articles another element.
It was great, and I've been using them extensively ever since. And people who have been following my work will see a lot of this since that time, and we'll be doing it again for the next Copper Country issue.
Yep, exactly.
And so there really is a lot of stuff that even if people are familiar with the literature in a pretty deep way, there's going to be things in these that are going to be really new to them.
Yeah.
And that's before we even look at the carefully curated collections of photos. I know both of us spent a lot of time chasing down the history of the specimens one at a time to make sure that we could be confident.
And that's its own detective hunt, and it doesn't always get conclusive information. But that sleuthing is fascinating. And, the sleuthing that you were able to do on the Wayne State copper and some of these other really iconic specimens is great. And, I think we uncovered some information that certainly is not widely known and maybe hadn't really been known at all before.
We've definitely added some real documentation and provenance to some important specimens in the process of doing this. When Wendell approved the drafts, he was really happy with it. And he's like, okay, so... when can we publish this? And I think, I said, and this was back in 2022, and I said, well, I think I can have it ready for the September-October issue if you'd like. And he said, let's do that. I may not have even told you this part of it. So I really busted my butt to have the layouts ready for the September-October
I think
issue.
I remember that, Yeah, you were kind of working over.
You and I were going back and forth on that.
A lot of iteration and editing over the summer. And
so then I sent the draft layouts to Wendell, and Wendell goes, these look really good. What would you suggest for the cover? If people don't know this, Wendell picks the covers exclusively. That's like the one thing nobody else can touch. Nobody else even has a say.
That's a veto level decision, yes.
Indeed. Yes. He asked me what I thought would be some good suggestions for the cover. So I sent him, I think, 3 or 4 photos from the issue and said, I think these were the ones that, I would suggest. And one of them was the Wayne State copper. And so he obviously chose that. And he sent me back a cover mock-up. One of the things you do when you mock up the cover is you put all the text in there.
Of course.
And, the cover mock-up comes back. And remember, I'm expecting this is going to be for the September, October 2022. It comes back Jan-Feb 2023, his cover mock-up. And the thing you have to understand about that is Wendell always saves what he thinks is the coolest, sexiest,
the sort of coup d'etat issue or article.
Whatever he thinks is the most exciting thing, that's what he puts in the Jan-Feb issue, because that's the issue that comes out tandem to the Tucson.
Exactly, in issue 1 of the year,
Right, so it's a huge honor to have work be in that issue. And so when
Yeah.
I came back
Wow.
and I realized
Yeah.
he's thinking this is for Jan Feb, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, Wendell's on
We
board.
got the endorsement. Yeah.
You know,
That's
he's not
great.
just happy with
That's
the
great.
work,
Yeah.
he's really pleased.
It's great to hear that because I hadn't entirely put that together until now. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That really is a big endorsement.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's when I
Yeah.
knew we had,
Yeah.
you know, Wendell's full
Yeah.
buy-in.
We're on to maybe we might be on to something here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Yeah, cool.
you know, at that
Yeah.
point, the issue's
Yeah.
coming out. Wendell's like, okay, so what are you doing next for this series?
Yeah.
You know, he's fully on board. He's excited. He's asking me what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I called you and we started talking about, well, what is next?
Yeah, exactly.
Because in the end, we want to do this entire district mine by
Yeah,
mine, load
give
by
it a level
load.
of detail and kind of try to do it justice, so to speak, at that level for the entire district, which is a massive undertaking. And you know, I think in some of our discussions so far, we've talked about maybe ultimately as much as 4 issues, which is doable. And to cover everything, whether it's White Pine or, you know, tip of the peninsula or Quincy, this is a lot of information.
Right. So at this stage of the game, we're actually already well into the research and even starting to write
Yep.
for what
Issue
will
2.
be the second issue in this
Yep.
series and the Mineralogical Record's third issue on the Michigan Copper Country.
Yep.
And we're writing about the hard rock mines in Ontonagon County.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let you say have a little thought on this. That means everything in Ontonagon County except for the White Pine.
Yes.
And
yeah. So
why don't you explain kind of why we're not going to do that?
So, you know, in trying to formulate this, Chris and I were thinking about, do we geographic, temporal, geological? There's different ways to kind of categorize the copper country, right? But the sort of the county level designation makes sense in a lot of places, and particularly Ontonagon County, which some people refer to south of the bridge. And it's its own area with its own sort of copper country culture, so to speak, and its own mineral specimen history. And then you have the White Pine Mine, which is a total enigma. It's a Cooper Schiefer black shale hosted deposit.
Right.
Geologically, it's quite different than the other deposits. And its history is also much more contemporary. It was the last mine to operating up until 1995.
Right.
And it's sort of the bookmark on the end of the copper country history, if you will. But going back to the rest of Ontonagon County, I think it actually feeds nicely off of what we did in Keweenaw County because it was very important in the early development of the copper country in general.
Right.
You look at the Minnesota mine and Victoria and some of these small mines that had major mass copper, among other things. And then the Ontonagon Boulder as well, which is arguably the first really important Michigan copper, you know, ever.
Right.
Which is going to, I think, have its own little sub-chapter, so to speak, in what we're doing.
I'm particularly stoked about this because while the first mines to really be developed and to make profits for sure in Michigan were in Keweenaw County, and which is why we started in Keweenaw County.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, the human history of the copper country starts and centers around Ontonagon County, and so a lot of the deep early history, sort of pre-1840 history of the copper country really starts and focuses around Ontonagon County. And I had kind of known that going into this, but as I've been doing the research for this, I've realized, yes, even more so.
Yep.
This is where to tell the early story of the district.
It is. Yeah, and it's interesting too because Ontonagon County, and similar to Keweenaw County, but I would say even more so, has had a lot of good contemporary finds by the sort of the digger community. And that's been well documented by Tom Rosemeyer in particular.
Right.
But that old history, especially as it pertains to mineral specimens, as far as I can tell, there's nada. There is very little documented. Even in, you know, in the 92 Wilson and Dial, there's very little on Ontonagon County specifically.
That's right. Well, and a lot of that early history, what there is out there, it's in scattered references, small bits and pieces here and there is what I'm finding. And so this will wind up, for a lot of this history, we're actually going to wind up being the first people to have compiled a lot of that in one place. And so I'm really excited for that. So in some ways, this is going to be an even more important contribution than the Keweenaw was.
Yeah. I hope so. I mean, that's inspiring, and I'm looking forward to. I've started doing some reading. I know you're a little further along in the reading process than me, but I'm excited to go into things like the Copper Country Archives next time I'm in the Keweenaw and spend a day with archivists there. And I know that's going to be a treasure trove of information that I can dig through.
What really stood out to you as we were putting together all of the photos for this? Were there any photos that just made you go, wow?
Yeah, it's as somebody that loves copper deeply, it's very hard, obviously, to pick one. But I want to give a shout out to an iconic specimen, what I consider an iconic copper specimen, and just a particularly good photo that is taken by two of my favorite mineral people, one of whom happens to be here. This is a copper from the Phoenix mine, and it's one of the really iconic specimens in the AE Seaman Museum collection. Mm-hmm. It's from the Lucius Hubbard collection, which is also a really interesting provenance. And
yes.
Your article on Lucius Hubbard is fantastic. Those of you who have not read it, it's in Rocks and Minerals magazine. Certainly check that out. But I love the specimen, and I really love the photo as well. The way you and John Jacek captured the cooperite patina in the photo and the background choice, I think is awesome.
That specimen has always been one of my favorite, and when it came time to update the photography for it, I didn't feel like doing it myself. I asked John if he could help, and we spent a lot of time on that picture.
Oh, I bet. I mean, a specimen like this that has that kind of an intricate, unusual patina, that's very hard to capture that. And as you know, capturing the luster and the details of copper crystallization is challenging.
It's tricky. Yeah, no, I mean, we probably blew an hour fiddling with the lighting, took probably 100 shots over the course of that hour.
Yeah, wow.
And then went back through them and okay, this is the one.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, this photo was on the 2017 Midwest Minerals Theme in Tucson poster.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
And that's actually why we were reshooting it, was because I had kind of gotten it into my head that this was the specimen I wanted to be on that Tucson show poster.
Okay.
Gene Schlepp had asked me to provide a couple of different photos, and I offered him this photo and I think 2 or 3 others, but I was really hoping he would pick this one.
Well, I'm going to turn that question back on you and ask you if you have a particular photo that you liked.
Well, so
in our issue,
there were some amazing specimen photos and things like that that I took and other photographers took, things I'm very happy with, things that were a lot of fun to see.
Yep.
But one of the other things about doing these articles is you get to dig into some old photo archives and find a lot of neat old photos. And,
absolutely.
When I was looking for photos, for historical photos for the Cliff Mine article particularly, one of the photos I came across is this image, which was taken in the 1850s.
Wow.
The photo was dated 1853 to 1857.
Wow.
And it shows the Cliff Mine working. You can actually see smoke coming out of one of the smokestacks. And why is this important? Photography had only existed since maybe the 1830s, 1840s. And it didn't become widely available or relatively inexpensive until well into the late 1860s, 1870s. And so to see somebody wasting such an expensive new technology photographing a mine in the 1850s is very, very rare. And so the fact that somebody bothered to take a picture of the Cliff Mine so early in its history demonstrated
to itself.
In my mind just how important the Cliff Mine was in people's imagination at the time. This isn't just something that collectors look back on and this was an important mineral locality. The contemporaries, when this mine were working, recognized this mine as being particularly important historically
in the local economy and the
local economy, the regional economy, and even in the world. I mean, in the 1850s, the Cliff Mine was one of the top copper producers worldwide.
Wow. Yeah.
And one of the most profitable mines in history at the time. And so the fact that this photo exists is testament to that.
Absolutely.
We had a lot of fun putting this whole thing together, Phil, and I'm doing a lot more of this obviously than you. But in your experience working on this project with me, are there things that came up that have given you some insight that would allow you to give maybe a little bit of advice to somebody who's thinking about writing for the Mineralogical Record?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, one of the biggest things I would say is try not to be too intimidated by the sort of imposter syndrome telling you, that little voice in your head, I'm not qualified for this. There are people that know more about this than me, people smarter than me. All those things may be true, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it and you can't jump into it and give it a go. And I think, knowing that you have resources and that the structure of your collaborative writing that you do is obviously a huge resource, and that made it more manageable. And I think the other thing I would say that's kind of related to that is think about it not as one giant project of, oh my God, I have to write a 400-page issue and do all this. Break it up into chunks. Really for me, breaking it up into manageable chunks and focusing on, today I'm going to work on the history. Next week I'm going to work on geology. Then when I'm in the Keweenaw, I'll go to the archives. You do enough of that, and then you look at your progress and you're like, wow, this is actually coming together.
I've got this. Yeah. And I think what you said, about, don't be so intimidated. Look, you're never going to be the greatest expert, and in fact, the greatest expert is not one person. It's, 100 people who have pieces of knowledge.
Completely.
And so what's more important than being a great expert on whatever you're going to write is the enthusiasm and the willingness to put some time in. And if you have those two things, everything else we can work around and produce a good product.
Exactly.
And my collaboration with you on this has been proof of that. Neither of us is the great expert on the district. Although I think people may look at us that way now. Jokes on them, I suppose, from one point of view. But on the other hand, we're becoming that.
Yeah, sure. And I think the final thing I would add to answer your question is, don't be afraid to use those outside resources. And what I mean by that is collaborators, people not directly involved in the magazine or the project. For me in particular, I'd want to acknowledge my friend Dr. Bob Rand in Detroit. He is a wonderful collector and friend and a former professor of writing and English, and he edited all of our articles in meticulous detail. And to anybody watching this thinking about writing, you can find somebody like that, and they will want to contribute and they will want to help you.
Yep. Bob saved our butts a couple of times.
He did.
He
did. So
he deserves more credit than we've given him. Honestly, he's just absolutely fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think we're just about out of time. So thanks for coming up.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
Joining me in this discussion.
Absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun.
It has.